Being here. My name is Deb Walker. I'm minister at Shaughnessy Heights United Church in Vancouver. And they actually fully sponsored my trip to be a Christian climate observer at COP28 in Dubai. And how I got involved in that, the year before, maybe you know St. Andrew's Wesley United Church downtown Vancouver. They are blessed with a lot of resources. And they were thinking, you know, we've been at this climate thing for 30 years. And we haven't been able to move the dial. Like, let's do something brand new. So in that spirit of innovation, they gave $200,000 to the Sierra Club BC. And they entered into this agreement of, it was called Mother Tree School with Professor Suzanne Simard, who wrote the book, What the Mother Tree Has to Teach Us. So Mother Tree School was then this shared project, and the first cohort of Mother Tree School was all faith leaders from the Lower Mainland, and I was invited to be one of those faith leaders. So in that group, I met this huge, diverse group of Christian leaders, and being new to Vancouver, moving during the pandemic, you know, feeling quite isolated, it was such a thrill to meet these other people involved in church leadership and climate action. And the way they modeled this Mother Tree School, it was 3 months of intense learning. 50% of the leadership came from Indigenous people and 50% from kind of white settler. We learned about Indigenous law from like the best Indigenous law person on the planet. He is John Burroughs out of U of T. His daughter also studies Indigenous law. I did a sweat with Reuben George on Tsleil-Waututh land. I'd never done a sweat before. We also did forest walks and just a ton of studying together. And what we found the most inspiring was to actually be together in community, facing these issues and having the solidarity of shoulder to shoulder Christian leaders all concerned about the same thing. And so there I met members from the Arosha community. Anyone familiar with Arosha? Yeah. So they have a Canadian like farm location in Surrey. And it is an intentional creation care community of volunteers and leaders, and they are doing incredible conservation work in a little stream that goes through their property. So it's really exciting. So through that connection with Arosha is one of the sponsors of the Christian Climate Observer Program. So I got the invitation through that series of, never in my wildest dreams did I think in a 6-month period I'd go from Mother Tree School to Dubai. I filled out my application and actually thought I would be too old to go. But I'm able-bodied and willing and up for the adventure, so I got accepted. Dubai was the first time a Muslim country hosted COP. And because it was a Muslim country, their hospitality was extraordinary. And the Muslim Council of Elders, it's a worldwide council of Muslim elders, they footed the bill for the first ever faith pavilion at a COP. And so because of how I got there, I felt like it was really important for me to attend the pavilion. So every day I checked in. I was there for 8 days. I checked in on the Faith Pavilion. All of the conversations are on a YouTube channel, Faith Pavilion COP, and they are some of the most meaningful conversations I've ever heard. And it's intergenerational, multi-faith, multi-denominational, and a lot of government sponsorships as well. Excuse me. So this is just faith, climate, and action. And it was a beautiful thing. I felt like what it must be to be an elite Olympic athlete, like without having to be an Olympic athlete. Because it was like the world had gathered in this one place, and it was truly like overwhelming emotionally to see everyone. You can advance that slide. So the 21st session of COP led to the Paris Agreement, and that is like 15 years, or it's 8 years old. How old is? I think 8 years. So the whole COP agreement was when collectively the resolution was to maintain the global rise in temperature to 1.5. So the slogan was 1.5 to stay alive. And it was everywhere around COP, and it is the huge pressing indicator for the work we have to do in the next 4.5 years, basically. You can advance. As I mentioned, I was an hour and 20 minutes away from it's called the Expo City, which is a man-made city on the edge of Dubai, and we took a train there every day. And most of Dubai really still is undeveloped. Like, there's so much desert, and then everything is brand shiny new. And if you saw 2 weeks ago in the news, like, they were underwater. They had 18 months worth of rainfall in a 24-hour period. And they are not designed for water runoff. They are designed for shade. Everything is designed to reflect the heat. And so the water damage now done to that city is extraordinary. Can go ahead. Expo City was just like a city. It was enormous. And I would take a train for an hour and 20 minutes, and then I would walk to the entrance of the site, and then I had about a 40-minute lineup to get through security. And there was double security, and then you're inside the event space. The women in this first photo, this was just a gathering place, but the gathering place was like larger than any airport I'd ever been into, and that was just the casual dining, meetup place. So the redhead, I know the picture's kind of small, but there's a lovely redhead Elsa in the far corner of that picture. And not only did we share a room, we shared a bed. And the hotel that we stayed in was something I'd never seen before. And partly because there was all these young students, the cost had to stay as low as possible. That's why we were so far out of town in probably a 1-star. It was a 1-star. 10. And Elsa and I got to be good friends. We got to be good chums after sharing a bed for 7 nights. It was lovely, and just all these crazy circumstances that you just can't even predict you're going to be in. You can advance. So there was a lot of hype about COP28 because it was in a petrostate. And the United Arab Emirate, of course, is founded on gas and oil. And so there was a lot of criticism about the doublespeak. It's time to unite the world to act together to deliver actionable solutions to the climate crisis. And the North Star, as I said before, is keeping this 1.5 degrees increase on global temperature within reach. And so this was the first time there was a global stocktake. And it was to basically do a report card on all the measures that the UN has adopted. I kept getting confused because they kept talking about the GST. And I was like, the GST, like what it, but it was the global stocktake, not, our GST. No. So the agenda was to fast track a just and orderly transition, and that is economic transition away from fossil fuels and an economy based on green jobs. And that means in all sectors. Fixing climate finance is a huge thing. And there's a lot of time spent in negotiations late into the night talking about climate finance. Because when countries who are underdeveloped suffer the worst from climate disasters, they are the least prepared to do so. And the funding for emergency support is complicated and piecemeal. And so we want to have a fixing climate finances so that it's not just repair and mitigation, but we do stuff ahead of time, like preventable stuff, that we are prepared and spend money working against these problems. Focus was on nature, lives, and livelihoods, and that goes back to the green transition, and fostering inclusivity for everyone. They went out of their way as the United Arab Emirates to say how welcome everyone was, but the reality is that country has barely been a democracy. It is run by a sultan. They have a royal family, and the truth is only about 20% of the citizens, 20% of the people who live in the EUA are citizens. That's only 1/5 of the people who live there. The rest are, some of them forced labor, and the other one just live in poverty. And they are all immigrants. Many have been born there, but they will never receive citizenship. And they are forced into these low-paying wage situations. As well, it is a country that has a lot of policy and legislation against women. And as a foreign woman, I could really do whatever I wanted to do. There was many European tourists who were there on vacation. They had nothing to do with COP. They could dress and act in any way they wanted, but the Arab Emirate women have a very controlled life. So it was difficult to receive that welcome for everyone, knowing what the social psycho circumstances are in that country. We can go ahead. So the meetings and events were from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., 197 countries, and some reports are 96,000 delegates. So it was just like a sea of people. Out of that, there were 2,500 fossil fuel lobbyists. There was people going there to make oil deals. I functioned in what was called the Blue Zone, which was all the UN work. So there was meetings. Every country had a pavilion, but then there was also special interests like the Faith Pavilion. And then there were other areas of interest, gender, women, UNICEF, like any other thing you can think of that the UN is involved in, also had displays and areas that you could go and visit. As a Christian climate observer, I was free to do whatever I wanted during the day. We had no orders. And so I tried to do things that were really meaningful to me. So I did go to the Canadian Pavilion a number of times. I went to the Guatemalan Pavilion because my son married a woman from Guatemala. I went to the Korean Pavilion because I have a lot of colleagues who are from Korea. And just ones that really intrigued me and inspired, because the whole point of this is to make personal connections. The whole point of showing up and being there is to be transformed by listening to another person's story. So it was absolutely thrilling. I think you have to be an extrovert to be able to handle this. The introverts do COP online, and anyone can sign up to do COP online. And then there's, as I said, there's all kinds of the material on YouTube channels about the conversations. Outside of the Blue Zone was called the Green Zone, and that's where Russia, China, the US, and good old Saskatchewan showed up in the Green Zone to sell fossil fuels. And you just think like this is absolute lunacy, but there it is happening in broad daylight. I don't know what your politics are, but Danielle Smith and I bumped into each other a few times, and unbeknownst to me, I had been chatting with one of her staffers, and I kind of said, like, what's going on? What's going on over there? And they said, oh, Danielle Smith is coming. And I'm like, oh. And the staffer said, would you like a picture with her? And I'm like, absolutely not. And she showed up at COP with bodyguards, which was just the most ridiculous thing because, as I say, they worked overtime to create this safe, welcoming space for everyone. Like, Danielle Smith did not need bodyguards, and they looked like they had just been let go from the Highway Hotel, and it was just the most ridiculous thing I'd ever seen, but there she was. I saw her really taking it from, it must have been an Albertan, a kokum, a granny in a ribbon skirt, was just shaking her finger, and there was so much media around. Danielle Smith couldn't do anything but take it, and I was like, yes. There were protests all over the place. This is a South Korean protest. The protests were very monitored, like there was a lot you could not do in public. I did myself take part in a Palestine demonstration. We were encouraged to wear white, and then we all sat down on the ground, and they read the names of that thus far all the people who had been killed in Palestine, but we could not have any flags. We couldn't mention any words. We just had to be ourselves protesting. This was what a Faith Pavilion panel looked like. They were all panel discussions, and this one was Moving Faith Forward, Youth Leadership and Faith-Based Climate Advocacy. And these people were from all over the world, Philippines, Chile, UK, and the United States. And over here, there was a young guy from Barbados. And I said, ooh, Barbados, do you know, like, Maya Notley, who's the amazing prime minister from the Barbados? She does a lot with the IMF, and she's a huge warrior for climate change and island nations. And he goes, well, I work with her. And I'm like, wow. And he goes, do you want to meet her? And I'm like, yes. And total opposite to, do you want to meet Danielle Smith? I'm like, yes. And so he goes, she's really busy, so we might have to run. And so he's texting, and you know, like, I ran and got my picture taken with Maya Notley. And I felt like it really meant something. These conversations were utterly powerful. We can skip ahead. This I took, Andrew. University of Toronto is up there in the corner. This was a higher education pavilion. So this was just a whole bunch of schools around the world who are like ambitious for climate justice and climate change. So I only took the picture because of U of T. The witness of youth from around the world was so emotional. And it happened every day in every space. They were disturbing greenwashing. As soon as youth or young people heard the BS, they would go up and disturb panels in the biggest arenas that were there. Some of these places held like 1,000. I saw Hillary Clinton and John Kerry speak, and they were interrupted by, you know, the two-faced policy of the United States in many areas, because last year they made more on gas and oil than ever before. Like, and then they show up at COP speaking this double-speak and misinformation. I was having lunch in that one space I showed you right at the beginning, and there was some German youth in front of me, and they said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Oh, I'm from Western Canada." And they went, "Ugh." And I've traveled, and I'd never had that. And they said, that's where the dirty oil comes from. So, like, that is how young people in Europe see us. You know, so we have work to do. There's me at the Palestine demonstration. And it was only covered by Democracy Now! There was no local coverage. And even though we were in a Muslim country, the first week of December, there was no conversation about the war in Palestine and Israel. There was nobody mentioned it. It was just unsafe to go there. Look at how happy Mark Carney is to meet me. My mom was really impressed. And this is Maya Motley, and I encourage you to Google her. Like, she is a rock star for, like I say, these island nations who have the pressure of the rising sea that we simply don't have. The Maldives and all the island nations around, like New Zealand, they are saving money because they think down the road they're going to have to buy a new homeland. Which makes me so nervous because that obviously did not work in 1948. But they are looking for a place to call home when their lands are underwater. The place was littered with famous people, and then this person over there was a youth negotiator for the UN from Lebanon. And, you know, I thought she was a rock star too, because she talked specifically about the issues impacting children and youth from climate change. And it impacts health, it impacts children, it impacts education, it impacts disabled people and the elderly. Like, it is the mother of all injustice. And so if people get tired of hearing about climate change, there's nothing we can do about it because it is real and it demands all of our attention because it is so connected to everything else. This discussion I ended up in because I saw Philippe Gagnon-Champagne. He's our Minister of Industry, and I saw him in that big space, and I thought, oh, I'm going to follow him and see where he goes. And then he went to this big discussion, and it was about decarbonization of industry. And Canada was one of the first 5 people to sign up for this decarbonization of industry. And that's the systematic changes that we need to have. It's not about you and me recycling our bottles. And there's an environmental premium on doing work a new way, but if we get enough companies and governments and sponsors, you know, these things will shift and will become affordable. John Kerry was only there for like 3 minutes and then he had to go, but Canada did really well at this discussion. This was waiting for Hillary Clinton to speak on the role of women, and it was a fantastic panel. You see how big the crowd is here. And this man down in the corner, Eugene Cho, he's American, and he's actually the chair, executive director of Bread for Life, which is now an organization I follow closely because Eugene was so phenomenal. And he said, now, in terms of faith organizations, you can't be an organization in food and feeding programs. Like, you can't be in food security and not be about climate change because those two are just inseparable. And so he was amazing. He and I were partners, and we had to, every day somebody else got the responsibility of creating a newsletter. That was a daily thing that everyone did. Phil, did you get my newsletter when I was in Dubai? Because the whole point of the Climate Observer program was we had to network. Like, speaking here today is me fulfilling my obligation to the Christian Climate Observers. And then I had about 160 people on my newsletter list. And then the Climate observers themselves had a list. And so it was just about spreading out these stories. And you think about all the expense and carbon footprint of us gathering in this space, but people from the global south do not have the opportunities we have to give their personal testimony about how climate change is a life and death situation for them. And so, again, it was like so profound to be shoulder to shoulder with people who are in this fight for their life, really. This is Dorcas, who was absolutely delightful, and she devotes all of her time to mangrove forests that are the front line protection against the ocean and erosion and pollution, and it cleans their world. She came from an extremely evangelical conservative background, and I just loved her. And this was that night of our last supper together. I was in week 1 and she was in week 2, but we have now stayed connected. And just to have this relationship, different continents, different generations, and one heart. And so it, again, it's just like transformative to be able to participate that way. These were all the climate observers, week 1 and week 2, and these people will be governors and CEOs and presidents. Like the talent in this space was incredible. And they're not all in science, they are in politics, they are in innovation, they are in design. You know, one of them was a cartoonist and just does climate cartooning. Like, and so again, it was just like they live with such integrity, and their choice is to live in a particular way that brings healing to the earth. And it was so fabulous. And that's all of us from all over. There are people from Peru, Mexico, New Zealand. I think there was only 2 Canadians. This Samuel on the edge here is the one who is the director of Arosha in Surrey. And we went on a bus trip to Abu Dhabi to meet Muslim climate activists and have this day together. And one of the retired Presbyterian guys, he's up in the back corner, he said to me, do you have a collar? And I'm like, actually, I don't. He's like, could you get one? And I'm like, yeah, I could borrow one, but I've never been in the habit of wearing a collar. And he said, we're going to have a day with these Muslim friends, and it would be really good. He said, they love that stuff, and none of us wear a collar. It's not part of an evangelical tradition. And I said, I can borrow a collar. I could do that for the group. So we'd been together for like 7 days. Our second last day was this climate conversation with Muslim climate activists. So I show up in my collar and a black skirt and some John Fluvog shoes. And all these young kids are like, wait, what? You're a priest? And I'm like, yeah, like I'm not a priest, but, and they're like, wow. Like, and Joy, who is beside the redhead in the front in the blue short sleeve dress, when we were leaving that night, she kind of followed me down the sidewalk because I left the next morning very early. And she said, Deb, you're leaving? And I said, yes. And she goes, I just want to say, I want to be just like you when I grow up. And I mean, it was a totally overwhelming thing to say. But I came away, first of all, feeling so affirmed by this group of people. They were evangelical tradition, which is not my tradition, but they were willing to risk everything for climate justice. And they are full on 100% in the science and evidence-based decision-making and policy. And it costs them way more to go home to their home congregations and give this message than it costs me. And so they are really on the edge of breaking away from their communities of faith because they don't have the kind of support we enjoy in the United Church. So their leadership, their knowledge, their commitment just absolutely filled me with inspiration. And I now do the second Tuesday of every month. It's called Climate Intercessors, and it's a group from all over the world. I think there's 2 sessions because of the time change. And we get together, and it's called Praying Headline News. And we just get together on Zoom and pray for news headlines about climate. And then we go a little deeper, and someone might share a teaching, and then we pray about that. And I gotta say, as simple and kind of unimaginative as that is, it has helped me so much in my personal work because I am assured over and over again that I am not alone in this. And that means everything. I think that's it. Is that it? Is that my last slide? Yeah. So I could talk for 4 hours straight about this if you let me. So thank you for your patience. And thanks again for having me this morning.